Hi, my name is Rich McClure.
And I'm Sharon Buchanan-McClure, and we're excited to share our intentional but surprising journey.
We will talk about phases of our life journey that by God's grace have worked for us.
Hello, and welcome to the Redirect Podcast, where we have spirited conversations and tell stories about finding purpose in retirement. For us, retirement isn't an ending, it's a beginning. Time to redirect your energy, wisdom, and passion toward new horizons. Whether you've recently retired, are planning for that transition, or are years into this journey, this podcast is your companion in navigating this meaningful chapter of life. Well, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Redirect Podcast. I am coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm helping to care for my two grandkids while my son is shooting a commercial in Sofia, Bulgaria. Curt and Adam and Rich and Sharon, where are you guys?
Well, I'm in Cincinnati. I'm down in my home office and, holding down the fort here.
And I am at the intergalactic headquarters of the Redirect U Enterprises, also Cincinnati.
And Sharon and I are here at our home in St. Louis.
Does that make us global? I think that makes us a global podcast.
At least Midwest regional, yeah.
At least Midwest regional. All right, well, today we're going to touch on setting goals, especially in our next 30. Adam and Curt, when I mention goal setting, first, what comes to mind? And second, is goal setting only a work thing, or do you set goals with your wife or even your family?
I started to get the shivers. Because all of a sudden I was back in the work world. I did a lot of goal setting for obvious reasons, being in sales revenue and all this type of stuff. So it was constantly monitoring analytics, blah, 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 blah. Where are we going to be this week? Where are we going to be next month? Where are we going to be 3 years from now? And there was a lot of goal setting for that. As far as personally, I'm more of a task list guy. Now, if I can write a goal that's going to happen within 24 hours, well, then yes, I do a lot of that. But as far as stuff that is goal setting of what I have plans for the year, I have an idea of it, but I don't do a formalized structure of writing it down, analyzing it. So the answer to that is no. So I don't.
For me, I've never been really good at setting goals, and I'm not sure why. I hear so much positivity about it, so much goodness that can come from that. I've just never been good at it. Professionally, I do that as is necessary, but personally, I've never been good at it. Now, we did have an episode a few episodes ago with Scott Weiss, who talked about him and his wife, Charla, going to an annual planning meeting for their family. And in the episode, they talked about going to New York City, which I found intriguing. And that inspired me. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation to get some more edification out of kind of the process maybe and some of the do's and don'ts and how it's worked for Rich and Sharon, because I would like to implement that in my relationship, with my wife, Sandy. I think that has more positives than negatives. I think if we can go about this carefully and with the Lord in mind, I'm excited about that.
And with intentionality.
Dale, I know that you're going to share your part, but are you able to separate? Because Fran worked with you, so of course you did goal setting in the house. So that doesn't count as the wife goal setting.
Wow. You know what? I did probably the smartest thing I ever did, and that was to hire great people around me. I was a visionary. I was the ADD visionary guy. I could come up with great ideas, be really creative about making them happen. But the goal setting part was done by the people around me. I knew we had to take steps to get that vision to come to life. But personally, and this is kind of where we're going to go with our conversation today, my wife, Fran, she likes to take things as they come. She calls it bumping through life. She's very comfortable with that, and I know not to rock the ship when I don't have to, but there's nothing formal that we do, but goal setting for us is really talking about, what are we going to do in the near term, kind of like you, Curt, and agreeing how to get it done. but I am all ears because I want to hear from Rich and Sharon, who have done this a lot better. And Curt, to your answer, just because Fran and I work so closely together, she was my COO when I was the CEO. And, we just talked business 24 hours a day. It was our relationship for a while. And, I can't say that her and I ever broke back separately and said, okay, now let's take, a holistic approach to what the next year might bring. How are we going to achieve it? So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, we are too. So let's get started. Let me get the introductions off the table so we can get right into this conversation. Today's friends of the Redirect podcast are Rich McClure and Sharon Buchanan-McClure. Throughout their 48-year marriage, Rich and Sharon have been taught a great deal about how to honor each other in God's ordained marriage partnership. Their growth of intentionally serving each other has been a priority when they were preparing to marry. God has sustained their commitment. Having experienced what Rich and Sharon referred to as Life 1 and Life 2, they are now engaged in Life 3, which reflects their learnings for the first 2 phases of their married life. Over 5 years of discussion before retirement, Rich and Sharon intentionally established 5 goals together for Life 3. During today's visit with Rich and Sharon, we will learn more about their lives and Life 3, keeping in mind Proverbs 16:9. We can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. Rich and Sharon, welcome to the Redirect podcast.
It's great to be here.
It is.
So, you guys have been married for 48 years. Congratulations. That's a beautiful thing. And I'm very curious to hear more of your story about how has your relationship over 48 years together evolved?
Well, I'll start, and Sharon has got lots to contribute here in this front. We met working in an elected official's office in Jefferson City, Missouri. Sharon actually hired me as an intern into that office, and we
seems like she's kept you around for a little while.
Yeah, that's right. Some people marry the boss's daughter. I married the boss, and by the way, that hasn't changed.
Good plan.
And interestingly enough, we had our kind of own premarital counseling that we did with each other, in addition to what we did more formally, where we talked about we wanted our marriage to be different, and we wanted it to set an example that sometimes you don't see set in a marriage.
I think one of the unexpected benefits of the way our marriage journey started was that we left family in Missouri and lived in Chicago the first year we were married. And that actually proved to be its own gift. And then we were in Springfield, Illinois for 6.5. So we were away from friends, away from family. And so by necessity, you relied on one another and navigated new experiences, processed them together. And I think that really helped.
I'm really glad you brought that up because my wife and I experienced the same thing. We met each other in Cincinnati. I'm from Chicago. She was from Palo Alto. And having to kind of rely on each other in the early years was really foundationally developmentally great for us.
Well, and we couldn't afford to get much entertainment experience. So we had to kind of, figure out how to kick things around ourselves. And our support system was our Sunday school class. And none of us could afford to go to the movies or do any of that. So you just hung out together.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about Life 1? Give us a little history. 48 years is a long time, and it obviously looking at you two and having the opportunity to chat with you in previous meetings, there's a great love there. There's a great respect there. You guys are generally in this together and doing what God wants you to do, and that's being a wonderful partner to one another. Tell me about Life 1. We referenced this in the introduction that there's a Life 1, Life 2, and now you're into this Life 3. What's Life 1 all about for you guys?
Well, as Sharon mentioned, Life One started in Chicago, and since we both were in public policy careers, Sharon's was a bit further along than mine. We continued that in our Illinois experience, and so Life One was public policy in state government in Illinois and Missouri. And I was in the executive branch for both of those experiences, which continued really through 1995 when we moved to St. Louis to begin corporate life. So Life One was this public policy career, and Sharon was in different public policy roles, sometimes legislative or outside the legislative branch. So you might describe that.
Right. In Illinois, I did kind of education issues on legislative staff with an association, with a university, representing their interests to the General Assembly and the executive branch. When we returned to Missouri, then I did public affairs for the Department of Mental Health. And we loved that phase of our life. It was incredibly hectic at times. Both of our children were born during that phase. And when we returned to Missouri, and Rich was working for the governor and I was working in mental health, and our youngest was, less than a year old, it was not uncommon for our mornings. We were not a household where you would get up and sit down with your cup of coffee and, read the paper and that kind of thing. We prided ourselves that we could get up and feed 2 children, dress them, feed ourselves, and be out the door in an hour. And so there was some sleep that was the benefit of doing that. But that was kind of life for a certain period of time.
At that stage in your Life One, if you could go back and give yourself some advice at about that time, when the little ones were small and you guys were running hard and both really in the public eye.
Well, I think I was far too much a slave to my schedule. And, in many ways, my schedule, my calendar were not my own. When you work for a governor, you have his schedule, basically, and you have to support that schedule. And so I'm sure there were times where I could have said, I just can't be at that event, or could we reschedule that meeting because I need to be at a Little League game or something. And I didn't do that. And, so I've talked about that in very public settings. And finally, our son said to me one time, Dad, will you get over that? True, you weren't around some. And it is true that Mom taught me to play catch and taught me baseball. But we seem to have turned out okay. So you need to get over it. Now, the truth of the matter was she was the better one to teach him to play baseball than I was. So there was just both a skill set there as well. So from my perspective, I would say I would give my advice. Don't take your schedule too seriously.
And you know what? That's great advice that your son gave you, because I think there's many times that all of us sort of hold on to some of these things that we may have some regrets or something that we could have done better. And we sort of still hold on to that. But here he just said, hey, Dad, it's okay. Let it go. And that's another type of freedom that I think is a blessing to hear.
My view is do less second guessing. So I'm not sure I spend a lot of time trying to reevaluate and, if we'd done this or if we'd done that. It's just part of our journey. My other response to that is I think the best question to ask yourself when you're starting out a relationship and you're making some of those kinds of decisions is, what is the best choice that allows you to utilize your God-given gifts in a way that draws people toward Jesus? Some people will do that best being at home at a certain time period, and some won't. And others do a great job of carrying on that communication of faith when they're working and very busy. So it's not about what you're doing. It's about the way you're doing it and the way you're honoring God.
What a blessing to be relieved of that burden to some degree by your son specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let you off the hook on that, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and to build on the point about God directing our paths in the scripture, that sometimes those are not ways that are expected. In a 3-week time period, we had all of those life-changing events that they say don't have those happen at the same time for purposes of your mental and spiritual
We
health.
actually had 7 of the 10.
7 of the 10 stress factors.
Right.
And I'll get just some of them. We had a brand new baby who was 3 weeks old when we decided to move to Missouri. My father had passed away just the May before. We were selling a house, buying a house, starting a new pretty high-stress job. And all of that happened just over a very short period of time. But clearly it was God directing the path. It was a godsend to come to Missouri and renew our both our family relationships and our acquaintances and our careers here. And the other thing I'd say about Life One is that we didn't realize how special that phase was. At one point, Sharon and I were testifying before a legislative committee in Illinois, and I was testifying on one side of a bill. I was arguing for it, and she was arguing against it. And we both testified in the same hearing, in the same panel of witnesses. And so we went back and sat down, and somebody in the row behind us leaned forward and said, "I wonder what they talk about at night." And
During
Sharon,
that time, did you have separate bedrooms?
My response was, "Not this stuff."
That's healthy. That's healthy advice. That's great. So let's move into Life 2. What's Life 2 all about for you guys?
Well, here again, an unexpected, this is a surprising part of the early journey, is we got an opportunity to come to corporate America. United Van Lines had purchased Mayflower Transit and needed to broaden their management team. And so the CEO asked me to come to St. Louis and to join their management team and to run the United side of the house. And so that began a 20-year wonderful career and experience with wonderful people, mostly family-owned businesses in the moving and specialized logistics space. And 12 years of those, after having 2 or 3 experiences, including running the international company, were as CEO. And it was a time when, as a couple, we were called to different roles. I had to be out front in multiple occasions in civic roles, and Sharon had multiple opportunities of her own where she was working in her spaces and with her organizations. But she played a supporting role in ways that were really just extraordinary in Life too, in corporate life, including being a really powerful advisor to me. I didn't make a key hire unless we'd had an opportunity to meet the individual together, frequently with their spouse, and her judgment about would this work or would this not work was really important. And I had one executive that I worked with for 8 years, but probably, year 3 or 4 realized that this was probably not the best hire. Sharon knew it from like day 2 and said, to me, basically, at some point you're going to have to deal with this. And the point is that both at corporate events and conventions where she was supporting and being there in ways that gave me not only the social coverage that was needed, but also the counsel that really helped me be a better CEO.
Well, and Rich did an incredible job of giving me space and giving me that opportunity, and to utilize some of my skills that were hopefully beneficial when he was preparing for large speeches and rehearsing and doing all those things, that I could be hopefully a little helpful in those areas. So that made it more fun for me, and he gave me that space.
She would come to rehearsals for my speeches and, have really great critiques. And the team that was there would say, "Wow, I'm glad she was here because she could say that, so I didn't have to say that."
So let's ask the same question that Dale asked Life 1 for Life 2. Looking back now, what advice would you give that era or that edition of yourselves?
Regardless of what the role is or the experience is, how critically important it is to just be yourself. That a lot of people are watching you, And you can get really paranoid about that after a point, and it can be lonely at times, but the comfort comes from just being yourself.
And I would say that there were times of, they weren't crisis by any level of magnitude, but when we had a stressed subsidiary and we had to figure out, are we going to sell it or are we going to try to turn it around? I was on the road a lot, rocky shareholder meetings around that. Just having the strength of a marriage partnership where I could take those problems and I could take those issues and I could take that stress, and Sharon could help me process it, could help relieve it by suggesting other things, and then refocusing us on our children, who were in the early ages of schooling, moving to St. Louis. It was first couple of years when we moved here. There was a transition time for them and stressful in different ways. So I would say just it kind of, the advice would be to rely on the marriage partnership substantially when you're going through that kind of a high profile, challenging circumstance. And I would say, probably the best example of that was one of those surprising, totally unexpected events where we were asked to be on Undercover Boss. It was season 3 of a show that had gotten a little bit of a following. Those that have seen it know it's a fairly formulaic show where the CEO goes undercover, bumbles through jobs, meets really great employees, and gets to recognize them for what they do. So because it was so formulaic, the producers working for CBS wanted to change it up a little bit. So they met Sharon, and about 2 weeks in, they said, it would be great to have a spouse on the show and to have, in this case, her, work some jobs. And they kind of said, well, maybe she could compete for a job with me undercover, to which Sharon had, I thought, a very thankfully healthy reply.
Your version of this is a little different than mine, but I told him I didn't have any interest in competing with my husband or embarrassing him in any way.
I think, truthfully, she said, I will not be a part of making a fool out of my husband. What she was thinking was, he'll do just fine by himself. He won't need me.
That's his version, but not what I was thinking.
That statement is like Ronald Reagan-esque, right?
But because it was clear they really wanted that to happen, it gave me some flexibility to say what I was willing to do and not do, and the way I wanted to do it. And these crews come in, and it's like 80 people to put one of those on and travel. And Rich was having to go to how many sites? 5?
4, yeah.
5 sites. I only had to go to 1. So there's all this downtime that you interact with the production folks, and that was an interesting experience to see how those relationships evolved during that time period.
Well, and so here's the God thing in this show and how his ways are higher than ours. I thought, okay, this is highly unlikely that I was going to be on this show. They started with 300 and they kept cutting it, and finally offered it to us. I never thought it would happen and didn't really want it to happen. I don't like being the center of attention and not having a team around me to support things. And so when it happened, I thought, okay, Lord, you've put this in front of us. So I worked with individuals. 3 of them had a faith. We talked about faith issues when we were on breaks and at lunch. And there were just lots of faith messages in the 240 hours of video that they had. And so we're getting ready to go do the talk shows. And we say, couldn't see the episode. They said, tell us what's in it. And I thought, they're surely going to tell me, will you talk about your faith? They said, no, there's really none of that in there. And I was just devastated. I thought, okay, Lord, why did you put us through this? And because Sharon was the first spouse, and because she had said, I want you to show our marriage, that was one of her conditions. And I want you to show us processing, working together, and how that works. So there's this famous, we call it the hotel bedroom scene. It's very straightforward, very clean, where we're talking about what happened during the day. So long story short, the show turned out to be about our marriage. and the way our marriage has operated as a partnership, and Sharon coming in to work a job for me because I was, the story was I was a known entity. So she worked the job. We got to process it. And most people would say she saved the show because she got to talk about a female in a male-dominated industry and how you handle that and how you process it. So clearly that was God's purpose, was to use this show that had 11 million viewers when it aired to show a marriage partnership.
We will rejoin our conversation in just a moment. Thank you for listening to the Redirect Podcast. We appreciate your support. Do you love what you're hearing? Don't keep it to yourself. Follow the Redirect Podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and never miss an episode that inspires your next chapter in life's journey. While you're there, hit a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share your favorite episode with a friend who's ready for their own life pivot. And don't forget to join the conversation on Instagram at The Redirect Podcast. Comment, tag us, and let us know how you are redirecting your journey. Now let's get back to today's conversation. Before we jump into Life 3, I have a question. In looking back on Life 1 and Life 2, and I don't think from the day one, even though, Sharon, I think you have a beautiful eye for talent because, as we learned, you brought Rich in as an intern and he's still around. So I think that's tremendous. What's something to share with our listeners on what's important so that you can build and strengthen a relationship?
Well, I think one is to encourage and build and provide opportunities for your partner's strengths to grow and to be shown. And so Sharon has a gift for organizing and leading groups, everything from condo association boards to church initiatives and things that came surprisingly in Life 3 that we'll talk about. But the point is giving her the space to do that and to support her in doing that and to be someone who's not trying to prescribe or to dominate, but just to say, what can I do to help you use these gifts in ways that glorify God?
One thing that we did with every major decision we had to make in those years, we would sit down and do pros and cons together. And I think processing choices together was huge. And, we'd say, what impact is this going to have on our faith walk? How will it impact our marriage? How will it impact our kids? All of those things. And regardless of where each of us started out on any issue that we had to deal with, we went into it not with the idea of, I'm keeping track of how many I won and how many you won. If we differed on something, and we were usually pretty aligned, but if we differed on something, it wasn't keeping score. It was about how can we make the best decision. That was the goal. That process for us, that wouldn't work for everyone. But for us, we always felt at the end of the day, we felt very comfortable that we'd made the best decision.
That was a very intentional exercise that you incorporated when those big decisions came up.
That's right. That's right. And it as Sharon just said, it got us to a place where it wasn't, well, we disagree, so somebody's got to make a decision here, which frequently gets couples at odds. We got to the decisions together and in unity. And if God's calling you someplace, a big decision, he's going to call you in unity. He's not going to call you separately.
And so this might be a nice segue into the Life 3, considering goal setting and this decision-making process that you just spoke about. And how do you manage the differences of opinions? And maybe it's not the big decisions. Maybe it's a lesser tier than that. The difference of opinions. I really appreciated your comment, Sharon, about not keeping score. I think that's more harmful than most people know. And whether you're cognitively or just subconsciously keeping score, that's destructive.
Mm-hmm.
But how did you manage those differences of opinions and make space for each other and not create over-exercised sense of conflict?
Yeah, well, we began talking about Life 3 5 years before it began. So we'd had public policy, we'd had corporate life, And I was going to reach roughly 20 years of service at the company, 12 as CEO at age 60. And so 5 years out, I told my executive committee that I thought 60 would be the right time for me to move on, and that we should prepare a succession plan and do all the things that good companies should be doing. So we did that. And I credit Sharon with that side saying, okay, well, if we're really going to do that, then we ought to be thinking about what Life 3 looks like for us as partners. And so that began this 5-year discussion that led to these 5 goals that we thought would really be a healthy part of Life 3. And there wasn't really a lot of disagreement. I think we probably each, though, had different conceptions of how they might play out. For instance, I think Sharon thought, okay, he'll never pull the trigger at age 60. That's just too young. He'll still be having a good time. Now, I knew what would happen if my board decided it was time. That was pretty clear what happens. But if I decided and they weren't excited about me leaving, which they weren't, would they try to get me to stay? And so at 60 and a half was when the trigger actually got pulled. And secondly, I had the conception that I don't think was as clear in Sharon's mind, you can comment on this, that, okay, at 60, you've still got runway. Maybe I will go be a CEO of a faith-based not-for-profit. And I've got one more gig in me, and that's what I'll go do. And part of the surprising part of the way Life 3 developed is that didn't ever materialize.
No, I think that's true.
So when we got to Life 3 and the trigger had actually been pulled, now we've got some of the surprising things that start to happen. So I was leaving at the end of December of 2014. In August of 2014, Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. And subsequently, the governor of Missouri appointed the Ferguson Commission somewhat reluctantly. And commissions are not generally good ideas. They tend to end up on shelves gathering dust or be academic. But this was going to be a very different commission. And so for 13 months, the Lord had me immersed as a co-chair with a dear brother in just listening and just understanding the deep-seated racial inequity and injustice that had pervaded our region, just as it's pervaded many regions. And it was far beyond this one very tragic incident. And so for 13 months, that's not how I intended to spend my first year in Life 3. But Sharon was my partner in that. That's the key point for this podcast. She went to every commission meeting, which sometimes lasted 4 or 5 hours, where we were just listening to people telling their story and revealing their pain. She went to many, many working groups where was in effect the commission's eyes and ears. And if something would get off track and somebody would start pontificating, Sharon would get the working group back on track. So she became an incredible supporting partner in an effort and a cause that we never, either of us, expected to be involved in, certainly not in the first year of Life 3.
I'm going to go back and kind of help create that framework of what we had planned for Life 3. Maybe better than goals, they really are more our vision for Life 3 was we wanted to do things that had kingdom significance. We wanted to serve together as best we could in certain circumstances, not all. And we wanted it to be about legacy to our family and not about things like what you leave your kids and grandkids. My favorite definition of legacy is it's not what you leave them, it's what you put in them.
Wow.
And so we wanted to have the space to be able to do that.
Excuse me while I write that down.
The fourth one was to do stuff that was less stressful. And then the fifth was to also have some fun. There should be some fun in phase 3. So when Ferguson happened, obviously we did believe it had some kingdom significance. And, Rich was going to be very visible. When they did the announcement commission, there were 20-some media outlets from all over the world present for that. We did think our kids were very supportive of Rich doing that, and we thought that was also part of our legacy with them. It certainly was not less stressful. Let me say that for sure. And
how old were the kids at that time?
They were married with children, and we had to have real conversations with them because there were, risks to, they were posting bank account numbers and personal information, home addresses, all kinds of things that they had to be okay with.
But it was a family thing. It became not only just a couple thing, it truly became a family
Well,
thing.
it did. And their resolve, because it was a serious question whether we were going to put our family at risk. And we sat in our son's living room and he stood up and all of them said kind of in unison, you have to do this. This is a calling. This is where God is putting you. And it turned out the personal story in 15 seconds is I was called in part to lead because of my background, but really he was dealing with me personally. He was dealing with my understanding of what biblical justice and mercy really looked like and my own biases and my own inhibitions and the fact that I had not been engaged in these kinds of issues and clearly should have been. I think the other thing with regard to the second dynamic of serving together is we had a particular dimension that I was going to try to find places where I was the number two. I was serving and supporting as opposed to Sharon playing that role for me as she had for so many years. And we didn't have any idea what that looked like in Life 3. But in short order, over 4 or 5 years, Sharon co-chaired a biblical justice and mercy task force at our church. So I became the PowerPoint guy. She would tell me what she wanted to put on the PowerPoint, and I would support her as she was doing this. One time I tried to put my stuff in, Dale, by the way. You worked with your wife. And she said, no. That's not the way it's going to work. You put down what I tell you to put down. We're not doing your messages through. She was asked by the governor to be the chair of the St. Louis County Board of Elections during the 2020 election, which, as you recall, had very little controversy. And it was COVID. And she marshaled this bipartisan board through incredible crisis and came out with a stellar record. And my job was just to be a listener. She co-chaired the pastor search committee at our church. My job, they met here at our house. My job was to make the coffee and get out of the way. And the point is the Lord put opportunities out there for me to play that supporting role that none of which we expected.
Wow. Well, thanks for bringing to attention that you have these 5 goals or / missions that you guys are living by. And I think it's important to have that. So why is goal setting a practice that you guys have embraced and are bringing it into your Life 3 period of life?
Because it gives you something to measure against. And so we very intentionally every year take some time where we're by ourselves, no distractions. We take long walks and we talk about the past year and where some challenges were. And we're very honest with one another. What we kind of think each other needs to reassess a little bit or things that we thought worked really well. And how do you do that? And then that's the first walk. And then another walk is, okay, so what are we going to tweak in the coming year? Life is always throwing things at you. And unless you've got some kind of framework, it's so easy to get off on some rabbit trail that you didn't expect that's just consuming so much of your time. And for us, this really has been helpful that we frequently go back to and measure it against that. And Rich has a great criteria that he applies, which is his but-for test.
Yeah, since we're now 12 years into Life 3, we have to continue to evaluate how are we going to have impact and where should we be spending our time, particularly given these 5 priorities. And when we're asked to take a role or evaluating should we stay in a role, we apply this test called but for. But for our involvement would the following 3 things that are good and positive happen. It's not that somebody else couldn't help lead and make that happen, but we happen to be in a position where we either have time or resources or relationships or network or vision, whatever it happens to be. Now, as we've gone through Life 3, we've said, well, it could meet the but-for test, but we could be now taking a spot that should be somebody else's spot that's being trained so that they can be a more effective but-for kind of leader. And so we're consciously stepping back, even if we still feel like we're contributing in a positive and significant way, in order for others to step into those roles.
Can you give us an example of what that but-for process looks like?
Well, I mean, you have to try to figure out if an organization, I was working with a not-for-profit that happened to be in crisis. And because I had relationships with individuals that were stakeholders in the crisis that would allow me to step in and be able to work through some very difficult challenges and changes, the relationships were the but-for. And leveraging the fact that God had given me those relationships in order to get the organization to a healthier place became that dynamic.
So does that look like, but for those relationships, this endeavor couldn't have been successful?
That's right. It could have failed. It could have taken much longer to resolve the crisis, you know.
And the other side of that coin is then there are things, if something doesn't meet the but for, then we know this is something we really don't need to be spending time on, our time. That's an important factor. And we kind of realized that we do need to make space for younger people to develop their skills of leadership. And so we can mentor them and step back. And the beauty of that mentoring also provides space for a lot of those surprises and unexpected things where you need flexibility. And, Rich and I are in our 70s. So you have to have some flexibility for the unexpected health stuff that comes along, and make space for that. In the last year, Rich blew out his Achilles tendon. There was a time period we were both in a boot. I had a cornea transplant, and now I'm dealing with a breast cancer experience, and I'll have my first radiation treatment tomorrow. So you've got to create something in life 3 that has some reality to it, that there will be things that need to have space.
When the curveballs do come, like you're talking about, Sharon, is that a quick signal to go and, hey, let's be intentional. Let's go through our checklist?
That's a great question. Well,
Yeah.
we did. And you kind of posed the question very shortly after the diagnosis. Sharon said, okay, what are we going to stop doing to make space, to make sure we can do this together and not just do the medical procedures, but we can take time to make sure she can do the recuperation and all the things that she needed to be done, where I needed to be doing more than I might usually do. And, fortunately we were on a path where I was jettisoning some responsibilities gradually. We've just had to think about how do we make sure we create that space. So yes, it was an intentional conversation that Sharon put back on the table.
Well, in all of that, you still see ways that God puts those experiences there so that they can be used for his purposes. And you just have to be open to those relationships you didn't expect, common experiences, just all kinds of ways that what is not exactly easy can grow you and be helpful to someone else.
Your children, how are they reacting to your life 3? Have you had any conversations with them of what they're learning from what they're watching you do?
We have had some. One, I think they don't have any doubt that family is a priority, that when they need us, and we're very blessed that they live literally a block from each other, our 2 children, and their families. So the kids are together all the time, and we're about 20 minutes away. And our son is traveling right now, so we were able the last couple of days to help out our daughter-in-law. Honestly, our kids have done a great job of verbalizing the encouragement that they give to us based on the choices we've made. And not that they've all been good. And of course, one of their favorite things when you're together and they're in a light mood, they'll say, and you guys never knew about that, and then they giggle and have a great time, the whole thing. They've actually been very affirming.
We've consciously adopted a couple of practices that really have kind of reinforced these values. We take usually right now 2 times together where we go away for different purposes as a family, all 10 of us. And we call those memories worth repeating. And we've created a practice and a rhythm of memories worth repeating, where we hope and believe that they will continue that long after we're gone, where they're creating memories worth repeating. And secondly, we take each grandchild for a camp every year, and takes different forms, but usually we take them individually away for a week to the lake or somewhere else and have the opportunity just to spend time one-on-one with that grandchild. So it's an opportunity to transmit values, but it's also an opportunity to basically try to create life examples that we hope the good ones can be emulated and the bad ones can be dismissed.
Or learned from, right?
Or learned from, right?
Right.
Well, I would just like to say to you, Rich and Sharon, thank you so much for spending the time with us to share your story. And I can see it. Even though we're not in the same room, I can see the love. I can see the respect. I hear it in the voice. I hear it through your actions. And I thank you for throwing things out to us to be more intentional, to be more respectful of where God is wanting us to be and how we need to be working better with our spouses and our family members in order to be true to who we are and what we need to do in order to serve and give glory and honor to God. So thank you very much for sharing your story and talking to us about Life 3.
Well, thank you for what you do. This podcast has got an incredible purpose and vision behind it, and is a much-needed discussion. As we run across folks in our circle of friends, lots of folks are wrestling through these issues. So thank you for giving us the space to tell our story.
Well, thank you for being a great model. I'm going to be, putting to practice a lot of what went on in our last hour here. And I want to thank you for that. It's a gift.
Totally. You guys are such a good example of continued respect and strengthening relationships as they move along and not just letting them drift and disconnect. So inspirational, informational, really helpful. And thanks for joining us on the Redirect Podcast. Catch up on all the Redirect Podcast episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To begin your redirect journey, head over to redirect-u.com. Want to connect with the Redirect team? Feel free to email us at info@redirect-u.com. Remember, there's purpose in your life, so find it and go do something about it.
Hey, I've got one more comment. The Redirect Podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. We engage in an open, honest conversations about personal growth, life transitions, and the lessons we've learned through our own experiences. While we speak as experts in our own lives, we are not licensed therapists, medical professionals, or certified coaches. The content shared on the Redirect Podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the guidance of qualified professionals for any physical, mental, or emotional concerns that you may have. We're grateful to share this space with you and hope that our stories inspire reflection and connection. If you're in need of more support, we encourage you to connect with a trusted professional who can help.